Welcome back. We are starting with our penultimate lesson on ecology. Let's get started. Let's talk about the organization of the biosphere. So the biggest level, of course, is the biospheres, and within the biosphere we have biomes. So if you look at this image here, the biosphere is the Earth. The biome here, shown here, is this area. That's probably a tundra. Okay, it's just south of so the tundra, and then and that is called the biome. The biome is a tundra. And then under the tundra, we have an ecosystem. And ecosystems are made up of two things: biotic factors, which are living, and abiotic factors, which are non-living. Okay. Then we have communities within our ecosystems. Under those communities, we have populations, and then we have organisms. And those are our areas of organization. So we'll look at some of those more. Now let's look at the ecological niche. All right. So every organism in a community has a specific niche, and the niche is their role in that ecosystem. So, and that can include the habitat, their place in the food web, and their interrelationships. So here we have a niche of a spruce tree. We have 3 different birds living at 3 different areas of the tree. They have different habitats, different places in the food web, and different relationships with that tree and with other things in that ecological community. Transfer of energy. This is really important. All right. All energy ultimately comes from the sun. All right. Solar energy is used by producers to make food. So if we look here, we have the sun right here coming down and sending the energy to the grass. The grass is a producer because it can produce sugar through photosynthesis. Then we have a series of consumers. Consumers eat producers directly, all right? Or they eat other consumers to gain food, all right? And each step in the food web is called a trophic level. So here we have a mouse who eats the grass. The mouse is then consumed by the snake, and then the snake is consumed by the hawk. All right. Here in this food web, okay, we show the transfer of energy from one organism to the other. But notice, the energy only moves in one direction, and that is up, from the producers up to these quaternary consumers, which we here have at the top is the hawk. And it can eat all of these tertiary consumers who eat all the secondary, and it keeps going down until we're back down to producers. All right? Ecological efficiency. So how efficient is this transfer of energy? So only about 10% of the energy in one level is passed to the next level. And these levels are called trophic levels. So if we were to look at this, the producers, they're taking energy from the sun and making sugar, okay? And they take about 10% of the energy from the sun. Those producers are then consumed by the primary consumers, and they only get about 10% of the energy from the producers. And then it keeps going up. So the most energy gets to the producers, the least is at the tertiary and quaternary consumers. All right. How is all the other energy? What happens to the other 90% of the energy? Well, that energy is lost for biological work. So that can be eating, growing, respiring, breathing, all of those things. That was the bell. And all of these things are converted to heat. So we're losing, and only about 10% is being passed, which is actually a lot when we look at efficiency in physics, but it's still pretty low. The cycling of matter. So then, after we get to those tertiary consumers, what happens? What happens to them? Well, they die eventually, and they have wastes. And all those things. And they have to be broken down. And they're broken down by what are called decomposers. All right, so decomposers break down wastes and dead organisms, and that returns nutrients to the soil. So they're broken down into the soil. And then that broken down material can be reused by the producers. All right, and examples of decomposers include bacteria, fungi, and some invertebrates. All are breaking it down. So the eagle dies, lays on the ground, is decomposed by various bacteria, fungi, and invertebrates. It goes back into the grass, all right, helps the grass grow, and then it goes back up the food chain. So we should have two other cycles that we need to look at. First, we need to look at the water cycle. All right, so the water cycle is water from the ocean, the soil, and the lake evaporate to form clouds. Clouds condense, and then there's precipitation in the form of snow, rain, any hail, any of those things. And then the rain comes back down, it runs off, goes back into the lakes and the oceans and the soil where it is evaporated again and continues the cycle. We also have the nitrogen cycle. So there's nitrogen in the atmosphere that is coming from the plants, okay? But there's also nitrogen in the soil. So nitrogen from decaying matter goes into the soil. The bacteria in the soil fix it so it can be consumed by the plants, because the plants need the nitrogen, because nitrogen is an essential element for amino acids. Okay, so then those producers make proteins with nitrogen, and the producers are then consumed again by animals, and then they poop and they die, and it all starts the cycle again. Okay, also nitrogen is let off into the air by the plants too. Here's another really big cycle that you're going to need to know. It's the carbon cycle. And we've actually looked at the carbon cycle a little bit. It is driven by photosynthesis and cellular respiration. Now, I want you to remember that cellular respiration, I'm going to keep saying this, cellular respiration does have to do with breathing. Cellular respiration is taking sugar and making it into energy. But in order to do that, you must have oxygen. So you must breathe to complete cellular respiration. All right, so first we have the sun causing photosynthesis in the plants. All right, that's photosynthesis. Then we have food coming off, it's energy. And then it is broken down, all right, by the animal, and the animal gives off CO2, which goes into the atmosphere. Here we have a cow, he's farting and giving off CO2, all right, and that's going into the air. All right, also we have decaying plants and animal. We could have fossil fuels. They're all providing CO2 into the air, okay? CO2 is dissolved in the ocean, all right, in carbon shells, and that's being degraded and put back out. So it's a whole cycle. Now, ideally, we would be using as much CO2 in the process of photosynthesis as is giving off. But if you see here, there's a lot of ways that CO2 is being given off and not nearly as many ways as it's being used. And that's the problem that's resulting in too much CO2 in our air, and that can go into so many different things. But we have to know that CO2 is consumed by photosynthesis and produced by cellular respiration. So again, it's driven by photosynthesis and cellular respiration. Decomposition is a form of cellular respiration. Fossil fuel combustion adds CO2 to the atmosphere, and also deforestation removes trees that can remove CO2 from the atmosphere. So there's some problems with our carbon cycle. It's not very balanced right now. All right, community interactions. Okay, so every member of a community interacts with each other, and there's three of the main ways that they interact are called competition, predation, and symbiosis. So let's look at those particular three. Competition is the struggle for resources, including food, space, abiotic factors, mates, all of those things. We're fighting all over it. That's competition. Okay, so we're all fighting for limited resources. We have predations. Some organisms consume other organisms' prey. So humans are predators. Okay, we consume other prey, but we also consume producers. Okay, we cannot produce ourselves. Okay, we cannot complete photosynthesis ourselves. So here we have a snake eating a frog or a toad, whatever that is, and then we have also a tortoise here eating some producer, some green leaves. Symbiosis. Symbiosis is a close, permanent relationship between two organisms. It is not predation or competition, and there's three types. There's mutualism, parasitism, and commensalism. So mutualism is where both people are benefiting. So if we were to think about the bacteria in our gut, we are both benefiting there, okay? It helps us break down our food so we get more energy out of our food. It helps form our bowel movements more complete, and then the bacteria are benefiting because they're getting food from us. Okay, so that is a mutualism. We are in a symbiotic relationship with bacteria in our small and large intestine primarily, but there are some in our small, and it is a mutualistic relationship. Then we have parasitism. So this would be like getting a flatworm or a roundworm in your gut. When you get, say, a tapeworm, the tapeworm is benefiting by eating all your food, but it also often can kill humans because you start to lose weight. You're not getting the nutrition you need because the tapeworm is eating it. Some people would say that's a benefit because you lose weight, but no, it's not really. It's a parasite. So parasitism. If you've ever been to Florida and seen that lovely Spanish moss that grows on the trees, that is actually a parasite to that tree. It can take over and kill the tree if it's not kept in check. And then we have commensalism. Commensalism is where one animal is benefiting, but it is a neutral relationship for the other animal. So it doesn't really matter whether they're benefiting or not. So that a lot of ocean things like barnacles that are on whales, it really doesn't matter to the whale whether the barnacle is there or not, but it is beneficial to the barnacle. All right, let's look at population growth. So we're going to look at the J curve, which is exponential growth. This is a rapid growth in a short period of time. Okay. However, that J curve will eventually turn into an S curve. Okay, because the J curve is only looking at a small portion of this S curve. Okay, what is the S curve? The S curve, okay, we can only grow exponentially until we reach a point where we start to level out. And that leveling out place is called the carrying capacity. That is the maximum number of individuals an environment can support. So if we were to think of, say, packing people into the cafeteria, okay, we could say as many people who want to come climb into the cafeteria, and we have really rapid people running into the cafeteria, but we'd reach a point where it would start to slow down because the cafeteria would get full and we'd be trying to push people in there slowly, and because there is a maximum capacity that we can put in the cafeteria. We can't put, you can't keep exponentially pushing people into the cafeteria, and that would be shown as an S curve. Limiting factors. So one, we have density dependent limiting factors and density independent. So density dependent, those would be food, disease, mates. That's part of what determines the carrying capacity and limits the size of the population. Density independent would be natural disasters such as this forest fire here. Okay, you will see a lot more density dependent factors than density independent, though density independent happens randomly. Okay. Population growth. Once we start to reach that carrying capacity, you start to see a fluctuation, and this fluctuation is called dynamic equilibrium. It's a fluctuation around the carrying capacity. All right, let's talk about changes in communities over time. So we saw that image of a forest fire. So what is going to happen after that forest fire? We start seeing secession. Secession is this predictable way that we have seen that communities develop over time. They always go in the same order. So if we're looking at this image here, we see annual plants are the first plants we will see establishing in a community. So when that forest fire levels a whole forest, first you're going to see some annual plants popping up. And then after that, you will start to see some perennial plants and grasses, followed by shrubs, softwood trees and pines, and then finally hardwood trees. All right, changes in plant communities then lead to changes in animal communities.